So this is the title of our talk, and it's called All's Fair in Love and TNE Assessment. You can see there are 3 of them here, and my colleague Neil, who I don't think is online either, but who did a lot of the talking through and thinking with us. Okay, so just in the interest of fairness, this is what we're going to do. So we're going to tell you who we are. We're going to hear from you. I'm going to talk about maybe the concept of fairness and assessment. Then we'll go on to Liz, then on to all of us, and then back to Lori-ann before coming back to you. As fair as we can be. Okay, so who we are. So my name's Jennifer MacDougall. I work for the University of Glasgow, embedded within the James Watt School of Engineering. My partnership university I work on is Glasgow College UESTC. It's in Chengdu in Hainan. All of our EAP teaching staff are employed directly by the Chinese partner. Okay. And we have a mix of Chinese nationals and international teachers or lecturers, practitioners, let's say, on the team. And for many of these practitioners, it may be their first ever teaching post and generally their first ever EAP post.
I'm Liz Wilding, University of Reading, and we work with a partner called the Nanjing University of Information Science and Technology, NUIST, and we have a joint institute, the NUIST Reading Academy. Our setup is very similar to the one Jen has just described, you can see on the screen. Our teachers, it may be their first EAP post, but most of them had quite extensive teaching experience beforehand.
Hi, I'm Lori-ann Milln. I'm from Southampton, and we have a partner in Harbin Engineering University, specialising in ocean underwater acoustics and naval architecture. The main difference between my programme and these two is we have flying faculty model, which involves us sending out group of teachers short periods of time. And I'm kind of responsible for the UK team. There are HU English team as well. Okay, let's get going.
And like all good English teachers, we're going to start by asking you a question. So the question for you is, what can make EAP assessment unfair? And yes, we have a Padlet, because who doesn't love a Padlet? So if you'd be so kind, we're going to gather your thoughts now. We'll give you about 2 minutes, and we'll come back to it during the Q&A session. And while you're doing that, we've got these 2 quotes here that we think are particularly pertinent about just the difficulty of defining fairness, which is our topic in assessment. And we've drawn on these. You'll see them, these authors reappear throughout. So if we give you a couple of minutes to share your thoughts, hopefully that's working. If anyone has any trouble, let me know. I'll probably throw up my hands and say, uh-oh. Is it
working? I think it's sure. Anybody got on? Yeah? Okay.
Oh, okay.
It means then it's not our fault.
It's not your fault.
That's the key thing.
It may not be fair, but it's not our fault.
So a lot of stuff.
We'll talk about fair access in a little bit. So
Don't worry if you don't get on, because we will have a Q&A at the end, and you can hold your thoughts for the end if you don't manage to write them down.
yeah.
You see. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to move on. Yeah. And I'm going to talk a little bit about fairness as a concept, and particularly in the area of assessment. So I believe that Aesop said that a fair-minded person tries to see both sides of an argument, but in the literature what we find is that when we start to talk about assessment, it's not about two sides, it's about many, many things at the same time. Bowd talks about double duty, this idea that we're both trying to work with grading, evaluating and learning at the same time when we're assessing. And Carlos talks about how this leads to a lot of tension and compromise within what we do in assessment. So I would say that when we start to talk about fairness, in assessment, we have this very multifaceted, dilemmatic space, what Honig would call a dilemmatic space. So it's not just that it's a dilemma how we do it, the whole thing throws up many, many dilemmas for us. And I'm going to just cover a little bit about what Fulcher says fairness encapsulates. This is, I think Fulcher was mentioned this morning, actually, and he talks a lot about assessment and obviously testing. And he tries to unpack what we're actually talking about when we're looking at assessment. So there are so many different aspects of it that we're trying to kind of grapple with. He talks about whether or not assessment is internal, something that's happening in the classroom, something that is related maybe more to learning, as opposed to something that's externally imposed, and how that can mean many, many different things in terms of fairness. Who is making the decisions? Who is it for? What is it for? Is it for political reasons? Is it for gatekeeping reasons? Is it to allow us to select people? So all of these things all kind of intermesh when we talk about assessment. I've written here that we have this kind of agenda of the powerful. What's the purpose of assessment? Is it to stop people? Is it to bring people in? All of this we need to think about. How do you create assessments that have no bias, that are not discriminating in any way, that are completely neutral? Because that's what fairness seems to say. That seems to me an impossibility. Whether it's about writing the tests or marking the tests or creation, all of that, the idea of absolute no bias is very difficult to see how it can happen. And part of the reason that you can't have any bias, you can't have no bias, is because all of us as human beings have our own identities, our own values, our own things about what we believe is meaningful. So all of these things are tied up with the way that assessments are created and the way that assessments are administered and the way that assessments are graded. Another nice thing that Fulcher talks about is rituals. He talks about how assessments having rituals try to create fairness. So we all come in at the same time, we all have the same rules, we have the same time for an exam or an assessment, and this is supposed to create a type of fairness. Does it? Interesting to think about these things. And then what are the consequences of that assessment? Are the consequences fair? Are they equal for everybody? All of these things to think about. And another paper from Gibson Stobbart, they talk about assessment and fairness in assessment as what has come before as well as what comes after the actual event. So do we all have equal access and resources when it comes to what we're being assessed on? And we're going to be looking at this a little bit later. These are probably kind of cornerstones of assessment, principles, yeah? But is it possible to have all of these in equal measure? Is it possible to have them balanced? Probably not. The more authentic, probably the less reliable. The more reliable, the worse the washback. All of these things come into play. McNamara asks about whether fairness can be universal, and we would argue that it can't. And this is an issue in TNE. We have assessment as a socially embedded activity, and we are working within different cultures where there are different ways of viewing things, different traditions. You were talking about that today, weren't you? In terms of China, we know that the Gaokao, a national test, is really, really important. It's hugely important in the psyche of the way that testing is done in China. It's supposed to be, the idea behind it is that it's the fairest way of testing. Everybody does the same test at the same time. Everybody has the same opportunity. But it creates a very exam-oriented education system with people being ranked and this idea of learning through, or passing through diligence, through learning things through rote, as very important. This is quite different from the way that perhaps we view what we should be doing through assessment. As I've said, there's a balance with reliability and validity. This is another issue in universality. And we also have issues around what do we mean by communicative competence. I keep looking at this man because he was talking about Japan. Is it David, your name is?
Daniel, yeah.
Daniel. You know, is being communicatively competent in Japan the same as it is in Scotland? Is it the same way of doing things? Or are we imposing things on people? We will talk a little bit about ranking. I think you're going to talk a little bit about ranking. But of course, we tend to use this kind of criterion referenced assessment in EAP, which could be very different than what people are used to. And the last thing to think about is, are we actually giving everybody the same chance, the same start? This again is what Fulcher says about locality, that how do we make that things should somehow be related to the local learning environment. But is that true in the way that we do TNE? Is that true, or do we, you're shaking your head, or do we have situations like this? This is what my colleague at Glasgow College, she's like my partner in crime, my Chinese partner in crime. She says that it's not fair because our students come in with lots and lots of different mixed levels, and then they're all expected to get the same grades at the same time within a very short period of time. She says some of the students are surely disadvantaged. It's not fair. It's not fair.
So I'll just anchor what we're talking about very specifically into one particular aspect of UK-China TNE. So we've got the figures from the British Council. I think they're the most recent. It's ever growing, and you get lots of joint programs and joint institutes. The three of us all work in joint institutes, so just talk a little bit about those. Very specifically, they're collaborative entities with joint governance, joint management, joint curricula. So both partners in different ways work together, and the teaching in different ways is delivered by both partners. I think what's particularly relevant for us is the students are enrolled on dual degrees, meaning that they get degrees from both institutions. So they're navigating two different learning cultures and assessment regimes at the same time. Now, to come back to EAP assessment specifically, another really key point is that for the undergraduate programs, there's no separate English entry requirement. They come in with their overall Gaokao score, as many of you will already know. Some come in with very good English, some with really quite low levels of English. but they're all coming into the same program. Their levels of listening and speaking, as we've seen from that comment from Jen's colleague, can be very different, often based on the province that they come from, but very variable again. So the sort of solution that joint institutes have come up with is to set English progression requirements instead of entry requirements, often set at the end of the first or second year, and they become very, very high stakes. Students will not be able to go on in their program in the UK system if they don't meet this progression requirement. So it's very, very high stakes for students at all over different levels. At the same time, they're competing, they are competing, but they're also completing their entire undergraduate degree in China, or at least most of our students are, under these 4.0 programs. And it's an EMI institution, but they have often very limited exposure to English outside the classrooms. So many of you would already know this, but what that ends up meaning is we have students on UK degrees in the UK, and the students in China on purportedly the same UK degree having very, very different experiences. And this relates directly to fairness. What is fair in this context and who gets to decide? So now I'm going to pass over to Lori-ann, who's going to talk to us in a bit more detail about certain aspects of this fairness and unfairness.
Okay, so as you can see, there's two very different systems at play, and our TNE students have to navigate both approaches to assessment, and they don't think it's fair in a lot of cases. So this is the types of comments I'm going to put up that we hear and we have heard in our programs. You'll probably recognise a lot of these, and they're also comments that are made here. So I will say that it's not particularly a TNE issue, but our students, the issues are exaggerated because of the two systems that they're trying to negotiate at the same time. So things like different teachers, different markers. So this is the inconsistency in marking. You've probably all recognised, I see some nods there. And it's about the subjectivity of our criterion referenced approach. They just don't understand, okay? So they question things, fair enough. What do I need to do to get from a 65 to a 70? We think we're giving them clear marking criteria, but for them it's not clear, okay? It's confusing. The descriptors, how do you get from one to the other? It's quite vague sometimes. Yeah, how do I get these top marks? I want to tell my parents I've got 100% like I used to get. Yeah, we need to know our ranking. There's university prizes, so they're living, studying in one system, but doing a degree of another, meaning they can't compete for these institution-wide prizes and awards in many cases. I don't care about feedback. Yeah, we all recognise that one. Why do I need to pass all these English exams? I'm studying engineering. So this is about they come in expecting to do an engineering degree. They know it's a joint programme, but do they really know what's involved with the English test? I don't think they do much of the time, and they're often better in maths and physics, and they question why they have to pass speaking skills, for example. So what can we do about this? These are possible solutions. I wouldn't say solutions, ways, advice. We can make it fairer. Obviously, moderation, much more strict moderation, standardisation, double marking procedures. More so, my students in particular, they compare marks across classes. The highest class gets an award, so they scrutinise every single thing. We don't have that as much in the UK. So, yeah, rigid standardisation. Transparency, much clearer criteria, basically assessment literacy, just teach them how to use it, exemplars, what to use. One of the most important things there is conversation and open dialogue, talking to them about these approaches and why we do things the way we do, and get them to trust this professional judgment that our system is based on, rather than just saying, this is the way we do it, you'll get used to it. I think saying to them, in my situation, I've got UK staff, so I need to teach them how to explain to their students and be more sympathetic with their concerns. But the basis of this is fair access. As Jen mentioned, they all need fair access. That's tricky. We can't control where they're from and their education background and their levels and entry, but what we can control is what happens in the classroom. The teaching and learning materials, for mine, we teach identical materials across the cohort. I still give my teachers agency that they plan for everyone else, so they share the planning, but identical materials taught in the same way. That for them is fair. Okay, yeah, so there are our solutions. But what do the teachers think? That's a lot of work for them, right?
Right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about teachers, but I'm not going to talk about UK-based teachers flying into China, because we've got a little bit of different perspective. So in my context, we have all the teachers employed by the Chinese university. However, we have both international and Chinese nationals all doing the same assessments, delivering the same material, delivering the same courses. We don't separate out how we do it. But I want to think about it mainly from the Chinese teachers that I work with. They're the bigger cohort of the teaching team. So when we think about, and I'm trying to be very careful about no cultural appropriation here, because I don't know exactly what the teachers think, but they talk to me all the time. We do lots of professional development, so I think I do have an understanding about some of their concerns. But we clearly have to, understand that we are coming from different knowledge traditions in terms of education and in terms of the way we do assessments. And this is talked about as knowledge traditions by Furlong and Whitty, and they look at this idea. They've looked at China versus the UK, and it's quite marked. And I guess some of what comes out in that is this kind of very much about the more you practice something, the better you will get at it and the higher score you will get. And the Gaokao really fronts the idea of diligence over creativity. So when we work with things like critical thinking, how fair it is critical thinking in terms of how the Chinese teachers are thinking about that in terms of assessing that. In one of our courses, we have a lot of issues with the idea of getting the students to do an evaluative thing where we say it's something that they're writing, we say you can bring in your own knowledge on this. That causes a lot of problems and cognitive dissonance in what is it you actually want. Lori-ann mentioned exemplars, and one of the things I've discovered with exemplars is they can be amazing, but they can also be a huge burden when people start to rely on them and use them almost as models of how to pass a test. So this is something that is quite normal in, again, in Gaokao, in the college English tests that exist, and so it's quite different to perhaps the way we would work. If you've got young and experienced practitioners, first time working in this kind of area, the confidence to actually assess and using criterion and something that no matter how much you standardise, there is still subjectivity in it. That can cause problems for people. As I think Lori-ann mentioned, there is a lot of ranking within Chinese education for many different purposes, but when you're working with teachers and they find it difficult not to compare students rather than focus on the criterion. I think we all do that, actually. I think it's really difficult not to say, but he was better than she was. or the other way around, probably she was better than he, usually in language education. And of course, changing hats, going from being a teacher to an assessor is very difficult, but actually in what we found that within the Chinese system, it's even more difficult because the teachers have a much closer relationship. The whole university has a much closer relationship. The parents are important. The teachers are important. They have student counsellors. Everybody is like one big family. And so actually not given the help, and how much help and support should I give to my student when it comes to an assessment? The students evaluate every one of our teachers, and it has an impact on their salary. Shockaroonie, yes it does. If somebody is getting poor evaluations, it can lead to them getting lower salaries. If somebody is getting very good evaluations, it can lead to bonuses. Now, how would that affect how you mark your students? Teachers are usually paid, I keep saying usually, but teachers are usually paid per hour of teaching. They have a number of teaching hours that they have to fulfil, and that is how the contract is worked out. What happens to marking then? How important is it if you're not allocated time within the paid part of your job? It's very high stakes. All of our courses, I don't know if it's the same, but all of our courses at Glasgow College UESTC, whether it's EIP or the technical courses, count towards the student's GPA. Not at Glasgow, because it's only after the second year that it counts towards their final grade, their final degree classification at Glasgow. But on the UESTC side, every single course counts towards the GPA. So if you're not getting good grades in English, you're going to complain, and you're going to complain to the teacher, and there's a lot of stress on the teacher. And I don't want to say them versus us, but if you've got two systems, then there is institutional pressure to make sure that your students are doing well, and you're employed by the Chinese partner, and the GPA is very important for the students getting on into postgraduate education. So what do? This is very quick. For me, the whole thing is about talking about stuff. We need to understand each other. We have to understand both lived experience here in Glasgow and in China. We try to talk about why we're doing the assessments, what are they for, why are we doing them in that way. We develop assessment literacies within the teachers. We do trialling of the assessments. We do piloting of the assessments. We discuss the assessments. When we do standardisation, it starts with standard setting that is a joint endeavour between myself, my team, and the Chinese team, where we come to the standard together, and then they deliver the standardisation to the bigger teaching team. We have put in some dedicated marking time, which was very unusual. So after exams, we have time. We've collaborated on the writing and editing of tests. So although we might take the final QA on it, we get people to work on that, which helps again to develop their thinking about assessment. A lot of our teachers have won awards for their teaching, for the way that they do things, for innovation. This is very important in China, again, just like with the students. And at the moment, EIP is very in at the moment, and probably going to get even more in. We always back the assessors. So when the standards aren't quite the way we want them to be, and when we get students after the fact complaining, this should be off the record. We back the assessors. We say the assessor is a professional EAP person and they know how to grade. This helps the teacher feel secure in the assessments that they're doing. We use our institutions to say what the rules are, and these are powerful rules. And the last thing I wanted to say is you need a huge amount of resilience, that's the word, resilience, because It takes a lot to collaborate on a TNE programme and to make it work because we have so many differences, even though we have similarities. And over to you.
So I'm going to come in and quickly talk about the institutional perspective on all of this. And particularly, I'm going to focus on fairness and how we might or might not manage failure. And my experience has largely been in foundation assessment. So when we launched our particular partnership at Newest, it quickly became apparent that there were very differing institutional expectations and requirements regarding a whole list of things, which some of you may find familiar if you've worked in the Chinese context. So we had these are some points of disconnect or just out-and-out disagreement. Now, we didn't just launch into this not knowing. The UK, the higher-ups, produced this beautiful document, an operational handbook, that had all of the policies set out very clearly, all built on the UK side. Went out to China, ta-da, here it is, we're great, it's lovely. But I read an interesting LinkedIn post on the train up to Sheffield that made the difference between partnerships, what did they call them? The symbolic partnership that lives on paper, and then the real partnership that lives in the classroom. And so we had this movement from this beautifully formed symbolic partnership to the messy, real partnership that, you know, we had to live out. So there were all kinds of disconnects. There was the whole discourse around what failure even is. How do you classify it? You know, is a 59% passing or failing? All of these things might sound familiar to people. Progression rate, we had a 97% progression rate after the first year. The UK side, yay, this is fantastic. The Chinese side was rightly concerned about those 3% because the systems to look after them weren't quite in place, and this was a big problem. We had operational details, policy details, and the one about appropriate assessment, we came in from the UK side with a different view of what the assessment should be, because we were getting them ready for UK degrees and UK study. So we took away the IELTS test that had been used in a previous iteration of the partnership and replaced it with our own test, which is called the TEEP, Test of English for Educational Purposes, and lots of coursework. And this created great concerns from the teachers, the students, and the management. So it just became apparent that it was a very different context. This nice paperwork didn't all fit, and that we came in from the UK thinking that UK degrees have to be fair, and this fairness might arise from it being the same for students in the UK, students anywhere else. It should all be the same, and that's fair. And it transpires not so much. So we did work on this. This was sort of the original iteration, but we did find or look for solutions. A lot of that involved rightfully adapting to local needs very quickly. So resits had been an issue. I didn't mention it in the previous slide, but resits, the students had to end up taking resits on the Chinese schedule and on the UK schedule. So occasionally they had 2 resits, which is obviously ludicrous. So we fixed that almost immediately. Students who failed foundation in the UK couldn't retake it, but we were able to implement a retake option. It was principled, it gave them a chance, it took allowance of the experience that they had that was different in China. So we aligned with some of their regulations where we could, and the point about communicating with stakeholders, this transition we did to the new test, the Chinese partners came and said, well, we have concerns about this. The parents are really involved. They don't understand what this new test is. So together we came up with a communication that we could send via our partner to the parents that explained what the test was, why we felt it worked, how it would fit with their future studies. And that really wasn't the only solution, but that was part of the solution that made it palatable to move to this new type of test. Along with that, we made sure we researched the impact of our new assessments. We were launching new assessments, and we wanted to know if this TEEP test was We felt it was fit for purpose. We wanted to double check that it was fit for purpose. So we did longitudinal research looking at the students' experience in the foundation year and onto their undergraduate program to find out how it aligned, how it prepared them for study. And yes, we found really positive results from that. So we were able to disseminate that as well. So yes, we've done things. We've tried to aim for alignment, adaptability, and agility. There's an article by Wang that talks about the AAA framework. And I think this is a wonderful thing to aim for. So it's nice, it's useful, really, really hard in reality. Anyone who's tried to do this will know that UK institutions are not always agile. And mine is certainly one of those. I hope no one from the institution's listening. I'm being recorded, so it's too late.
We're all sad.
And so we've aimed for this, but even with the best intentions, there are all these challenges. Time has been mentioned before, cultural difference, that's an interesting article by Bordonia that focuses on very much the operational details of assessment. But all back to the point that assessment is so very, very complex at all the different levels. So it's not easy, but I think Lori-ann, to conclude
Just to conclude, yes. So basically it's complex, it's a challenge. So just concluding with some questions. Is it possible to have truly fair assessment? No. No, we don't think so. Is it fair to expect our students to navigate these two systems? Not really, but what solutions I hope we've given today, not solutions, advice and suggestions, hopefully will make it fairer for them. And is it possible to develop an assessment where the two systems come together and align? We hope so, because that's true partnership. Truly successful TNE partnerships have that alignment, and they hopefully can meet in the middle one day. It's going to take a few years, but hopefully one day. So yeah, so the key is openness and dialogue, conversation. That's what we need. So thank you for listening.
Oh no, we have one more thing to say to you though.
Oh yes. Life's not fair. Thank you.
Thank you, but we also have the caveat.